The California sun blazed mercilessly overhead as Detective Sarah Martinez pulled her patrol car into the packed parking lot of Riverside Community Center. It was the kind of perfect Saturday morning that made people forget about crime, violence, and the darker realities of human nature. Families streamed through the entrance, carrying blankets, picnic baskets, and children buzzing with excitement for the annual safety fair. The event had been running for 12 years, originally conceived as a bridge between law enforcement and the diverse community of Riverside Heights, where trust in police had been historically strained. Sarah adjusted her uniform and checked her appearance in the rearview mirror. At 34, she had been with the department for 9 years, the last 3 as a K-9 handler. Her partner Rex, a magnificent 3-year-old German shepherd with intelligent amber eyes and a coat that gleamed like polished obsidian, panted eagerly in the back seat of the specially equipped patrol vehicle. He had been trained at the prestigious K-9 Academy in Sacramento, specializing in narcotics detection, but his gentle temperament made him perfect for community outreach events like this one. "Ready to meet your fans, boy?" Sarah asked, turning to scratch behind Rex's ears. His tail wagged with such enthusiasm that it created a rhythmic thumping against the metal partition, separating the front and back seats. Rex had an uncanny ability to sense human emotions, a trait that made him not just an excellent working dog, but also a therapeutic presence for trauma victims and anxious children. The community center's main lawn had been transformed into a festival wonderland. Colorful banners fluttered in the gentle breeze, announcing various safety demonstrations and educational booths. The fire department had brought their gleaming red truck, its chrome fixtures reflecting the sunlight like mirrors. Paramedics had set up a mock emergency response area where children could learn basic first aid. Local businesses had sponsored bounce houses, face painting stations, and a balloon artist who was already surrounded by a growing crowd of eager children. Sarah clipped Rex's ceremonial leash to his collar, a special leather one reserved for public appearances, emblazoned with the department's logo and his name in gold lettering. As they walked through the crowd toward their designated demonstration area, she observed the diverse tapestry of families that made Riverside Heights unique. She heard conversations flowing between English and Spanish, saw traditional clothing mixed with modern casual wear, and noticed children of every ethnicity playing together with the natural ease that adults seemed to lose somewhere along the way. Near the main stage, she spotted Maria Rodriguez setting up a small folding chair in the shade of an oak tree. Maria, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a neat bun, was well known in the community for her volunteer work at the local food bank and her famous tamales sold at community fundraisers. She was carefully arranging a small diaper bag and sippy cup, preparing for what Sarah assumed would be a long day of chasing after her granddaughter. 2-year-old Emma Rodriguez was a vision of childhood innocence, with dark curls that bounced with every movement and enormous brown eyes that seemed to absorb everything around her. She wore a yellow sundress covered in tiny butterflies and pink sandals that lit up with each step. Emma had the fearless curiosity typical of toddlers, but Sarah noticed something unusual about her behavior, while other children ran freely. Through the crowd, Emma stayed unusually close to her grandmother, one small hand always maintaining contact with Maria's colorful dress. The demonstration area had been set up with orange traffic cones, creating a large circle where Rex could safely interact with the public. Sarah had done hundreds of these events throughout her career, and she had developed a routine that never failed to captivate her audience. She would start with basic commands, showing how Rex responded to hand signals and voice commands. Then she would demonstrate his search capabilities using hidden training materials, always emphasizing that Rex was a friend to good people and only sought out dangerous items to keep the community safe. As families began gathering around the demonstration area, Sarah noticed the usual mix of reactions. Some children pressed forward eagerly, their faces bright with excitement at the prospect of meeting a real police dog. Others hung back nervously, unsure about the large animal, despite his friendly demeanor. Parents positioned themselves strategically, phones ready to capture the perfect photo of their children's first encounter with law enforcement. But it was Emma's reaction that caught Sarah's attention most distinctly. While other children focused entirely on Rex, Emma's gaze kept drifting to something or someone behind the crowd. Her small brow furrowed with what looked like recognition, mixed with distress, and she pressed herself more firmly against her grandmother's legs. Maria, chatting with other parents about typical grandmother concerns, nap schedules, potty training, and the challenges of keeping up with energetic toddlers, seemed oblivious to her granddaughter's growing unease. Sarah began her presentation with practiced professionalism, her voice carrying clearly across the gathered crowd. "Good morning, everyone. I'm Detective Martinez, and this handsome fellow is Rex. We're here today to show you how K9 units help keep our community safe." Rex sat at perfect attention, his ears perked forward and his intelligent eyes scanning the crowd. Children giggled and pointed, already enchanted by his commanding presence. As Sarah launched into her explanation of Rex's training and abilities, she found herself distracted by Emma's behavior. The little girl had begun tugging insistently on her grandmother's dress, her eyes darting between Rex and whatever had captured her attention in the crowd. There was something in Emma's expression, a mixture of recognition and fear, that seemed far too sophisticated for such a young child. The perfect community day was about to take a dark turn, though none of the laughing families could have predicted that a toddler's innocent words would soon shatter the peaceful afternoon and expose a truth that would shake the very foundation of their tight-knit community's trust. "Who wants to pet Rex?" Detective Sarah Martinez called out, her voice carrying across the excited crowd with practiced warmth. The question was like a magic spell. Instantly, nearly 24 children surged forward, their faces glowing with anticipation. Parents adjusted their positions, phones and cameras ready to capture precious memories of their little ones meeting the magnificent German Shepherd. Rex remained in perfect position, his tail wagging in controlled excitement as he had been trained to do during public interactions. His amber eyes sparkled with gentle intelligence, and his black coat seemed to absorb and reflect the California sunshine. Sarah had positioned herself strategically so that Rex sat between her and the approaching children, creating a safe barrier while still allowing intimate interaction. "Remember, everyone moves slowly and lets Rex sniff your hand first," Sarah instructed, demonstrating the proper technique. "He's very friendly, but he's also a working dog, so we treat him with respect." The children nodded solemnly, taking their responsibility as seriously as any adult might handle precious cargo. 8-year-old Marcus Chon was first in line, his face beaming with excitement as Rex's wet nose investigated his small palm. "He feels so soft," Marcus exclaimed, gently stroking Rex's head while his father David Chun watched proudly from the side. David, a lean man in his early 30s with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, wore a bright blue volunteer t-shirt, identifying him as a community center staff member. He had been helping coordinate the safety fair since early morning, ensuring everything ran smoothly for the hundreds of families attending. Behind Marcus, other children waited in an orderly line, their excitement barely contained. 5-year-old Sofia Martinez, no relation to Detective Martinez, clutched her mother's hand, bouncing on her toes with anticipation. 3-year-old Jake Thompson sucked his thumb nervously, while his father encouraged him to be brave. Each child represented the innocent trust that made events like this so meaningful, the belief that the world was fundamentally safe and that uniformed officers were friends and protectors. But on the periphery of this heartwarming scene, a different drama was unfolding. Emma Rodriguez remained pressed against her grandmother Maria's legs, her tiny hands gripping the fabric of Maria's colorful sundress with white-knuckled intensity. While other children focused entirely on Rex and the excitement of meeting a police dog, Emma's large brown eyes kept darting toward the crowd of adults watching from behind the demonstration area. "Mia, don't you want to pet the nice doggy?" Maria asked gently, following her granddaughter's gaze, but seeing nothing unusual among the familiar faces of neighbors and community members. Emma shook her head violently, her dark curls bouncing with the motion, and pressed herself even more firmly against her grandmother's protective presence. Sarah noticed Emma's reluctance and decided to try a gentler approach. She had worked with traumatized children before, can recognize the signs of a child struggling with internal conflict between natural curiosity and some deeper fear or discomfort. "It's okay if you're not ready," Sarah called out to Emma with a warm smile. "Rex will be here all morning. You can watch for now and maybe say hello later." The acknowledgement seemed to give Emma permission to continue observing, and she relaxed slightly against her grandmother's legs. But her attention remained divided, part of her clearly fascinated by Rex's gentle interactions with other children, while another part seemed hypervigilant about something else entirely. As the petting session continued, Sarah found herself studying Emma more carefully. The little girl's behavior wasn't typical shyness or fear of large dogs. There was a quality to her alertness that reminded Sarah of witnesses she had interviewed, people who had seen something traumatic and were unconsciously scanning their environment for potential threats. "Come on, Emma," Maria coaxed again, taking a step closer to the demonstration area. "Look how nice the doggy is with the other children. See? He's very gentle." It was then that everything changed in an instant that would be seared into Sarah's memory forever. Emma's small body went rigid. Her head turned like a radar dish, locking onto a target, and her tiny arm extended with surprising steadiness, pointing directly into the crowd of observing adults. Her finger aimed with the precision of an arrow toward David Chun, who was applauding his son, Marcus's brave interaction with Rex. "Doggy," Emma's voice rang out with crystal clarity, cutting through every conversation, every laugh, every ambient sound of the community fair. "Rex, bad man touch Emma's private parts." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Time seemed to freeze, as if someone had pressed a cosmic pause button. The cheerful chatter died instantly. Parents stopped mid-sentence. Children looked up from petting Rex, confused by the sudden tension. Even Rex sensed the shift in atmosphere, his ears pricking forward and his body subtly shifting into a more alert posture. Sarah felt her blood turn to ice water in her veins. In her 9 years of police work, she had heard thousands of accusations, confessions, and statements. But there was something about the way Emma spoke, the matter-of-fact tone, the specific language, the unwavering certainty in her pointing finger, that sent every alarm bell in Sarah's trained mind screaming at maximum volume. David Chun's reaction was immediate and telling. The color drained from his face like water from a broken glass. His mouth opened and closed wordlessly, and he took an involuntary step backward, his eyes wide with what looked unmistakably like panic. For just a fraction of a second, before his conscious mind could engage his social mask, his expression revealed everything Sarah needed to know. "Oh my God, Emma, no." Maria gasped, scooping her granddaughter up in her arms, with movements made clumsy by embarrassment and shock. "I'm so sorry, everyone. She's been having bad dreams lately. She doesn't know what she's saying." But Emma wasn't done. Secure in her grandmother's arms, she continued pointing at David with unwavering determination. "Bad man hurt Emma during nap time," she declared with the brutal honesty that only small children possess. "Touch Emma's private parts when other kids sleeping." The silence that followed was deafening. Sarah's training kicked into overdrive as she observed every micro-expression. Every body language cue, every reaction in the crowd. David Shun was desperately trying to reconstruct his composure, forcing a concerned smile that didn't reach his eyes. Other adults looked uncomfortable, uncertain how to process what they had just witnessed. Some clearly wanted to dismiss it as childish imagination, while others appeared deeply disturbed by the specificity of Emma's words. Rex, with the uncanny intuition that made him such an excellent working dog, moved protectively closer to Emma and Maria. His body language had shifted from friendly community ambassador to alert guardian, his eyes now fixed intently on David. Shun, as if he too sensed that something was terribly wrong. In that moment, Sarah Martinez knew that the perfect community day had just become something else entirely. The beginning of an investigation that would either clear an innocent man's name or expose a predator hiding in plain sight among the people trusted most with their children's safety. The words of a 2-year-old had just shattered the peaceful afternoon, and Sarah suspected that nothing in Riverside Heights would ever be quite the same again. The aftermath of Emma's accusation unfolded like a slow-motion explosion, with shock waves rippling outward through the crowd in concentric circles of disbelief, confusion, and growing discomfort. Detective Sarah Martinez watched with the trained eye of a seasoned investigator as human nature revealed itself in dozens of micro-reactions, happening simultaneously across the demonstration area. David Shun recovered from his initial shock with practiced efficiency, his face transforming from pale panic to concerned compassion in mere seconds. The transition was so smooth, it might have fooled anyone who hadn't witnessed that crucial first moment of unguarded terror. He stepped forward with his hands raised in a gesture of peaceful approach, his voice taking on the soothing tone he had perfected through years of working with children. "Oh, sweet Emma," David said, his words dripping with manufactured concern. "You must have had another one of those scary dreams we talked about. Remember how we discussed the difference between dreams and real life?" He moved closer to Maria and Emma with the confidence of someone accustomed to being trusted implicitly by parents and children alike. But Emma's reaction was immediate and visceral. The moment David took his first step toward them, she began screaming, not the tantrum cry of a frustrated toddler, but the primal, terror-filled shriek of genuine fear. Her small body went rigid in her grandmother's arms, her back arching as she tried to put maximum distance between herself and the approaching man. "No, no, bad man, go away," Emma screamed, her voice cracking with the intensity of her distress. "Don't touch Emma. Don't touch Emma." Her tiny fists pounded against her grandmother's shoulder as she tried to bury her face completely in Maria's neck. The raw terror in Emma's voice sent chills down Sarah's spine. She had interviewed enough genuine trauma victims to recognize authentic fear responses, and Emma's reaction had every hallmark of someone confronting their abuser. Children this young didn't possess the sophisticated acting skills necessary to fake such a visceral physical response. Maria Rodriguez found herself caught in a devastating emotional whirlwind. Her face flushed crimson with embarrassment as dozens of community members stared at her and her hysterical granddaughter. The weight of their judgment felt crushing. She could almost hear their thoughts questioning her parenting, wondering if she had failed to teach Emma proper social boundaries, speculating about what kind of household produced a child who would make such terrible accusations against a respected community member. "I'm so sorry, David," Maria stammered, her voice breaking with mortification. "She's been having nightmares for weeks. The pediatrician said it was normal for her age, just an overactive imagination." "Emma, Mia, stop this right now. You're being very rude to Mr. David." But even as Maria attempted damage control, Sarah noticed something crucial. The grandmother's protective instincts were warring with her social conditioning. Despite her verbal apologies, Maria's body language told a different story. She held Emma tighter, took an unconscious step backward, and positioned herself so that David couldn't get closer to her granddaughter without going through her first. The crowd's reaction revealed the complex social dynamics at play. Some parents looked genuinely disturbed by what they had witnessed, their parental instincts triggering alarm bells, despite their rational minds wanting to dismiss the accusation. Others appeared uncomfortable, but clearly wanted to return to the pleasant normalcy of the community fair. A few whispered among themselves, and Sarah caught fragments of their conversations. That poor little girl must be so confused, ... Children that age say the strangest things, ... David's been working with kids for years. He's wonderful with them, ... But did you see how scared she got when he approached? Maybe we should just give them some space. Rex, meanwhile, had become a four-legged lie detector. The German Shepherd's training in detecting human stress responses was manifesting in his behavior toward David Chun. Where moments before Rex had been relaxed and friendly with everyone, he now stood alert and focused, his intelligent amber eyes tracking David's every movement. The dog's body language had shifted to what Sarah recognized as his alert posture, not aggressive, but unmistakably wary. "Let me help," David continued, seemingly oblivious to or deliberately ignoring Emma's terror. "I've worked with traumatized children before. Sometimes they respond better to familiar voices." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small toy car, one of several he kept for calming upset children at the community center. "Look, Emma, remember your favorite red car? The one we play with during quiet time?" The mention of quiet time sent Emma into fresh paroxysms of fear. She began hyperventilating, her small chest rising and falling rapidly as panic overwhelmed her nervous system. "No quiet time. No quiet time. Tell Abuela no quiet time with bad man." Sarah's professional instincts finally overrode social politeness. She stepped forward smoothly, placing herself between David and the Rodriguez family with movements that appeared casual but were strategically calculated. Rex immediately moved to flank her, creating an even more effective barrier. "That won't be necessary, Mr. Chun," Sarah said firmly, her voice carrying the unmistakable authority of law enforcement. "I think Emma needs some space right now." She turned to Maria with practiced kindness while keeping David in her peripheral vision. "Mrs. Rodriguez, why don't we find somewhere quiet where Emma can calm down? Sometimes a change of environment helps with overwhelming situations." David's mask slipped again, just for an instant. Sarah caught the flash of frustration, quickly replaced by hurt innocence. "Of course, Officer Martinez, I was just trying to help. I hate seeing any child in distress." But his eyes held a calculating quality that made Sarah's skin crawl. As Sarah gently guided Maria and the still sobbing Emma toward a quieter area, near the community center's entrance, she found herself running rapid threat assessments. David Chun's behavior was textbook predator response. The immediate concern trolling, the attempts to physically approach the accusing child, the ready explanations for the child's confusion, and most tellingly, his intimate knowledge of Emma's routines and preferences. Other community members began dispersing, some following to offer help, others clearly wanting to distance themselves from the uncomfortable scene. The cheerful community fair continued around them, but the innocent atmosphere had been irreparably shattered by a toddler's brave words. Sarah realized that she was no longer just conducting a community demonstration. She was potentially at the beginning of a criminal investigation. And every instinct honed by 9 years of police work was screaming that Emma Rodriguez was telling the truth about David Chun. The web of lies was beginning to unravel, pulled loose by the honest words of someone too young to understand the complex social forces that protected predators and silenced victims. But Emma had spoken her truth, and Sarah Martinez was going to make sure someone listened. Monday morning arrived, gray and overcast. Matching Detective Sarah Martinez's somber mood, as she sat in her patrol car outside the Riverside Community Center at 6:47 a.m., 43 minutes before the facility officially opened. She had spent most of Sunday replaying Emma's accusation and David Chun's reactions, analyzing every detail with the methodical precision that had made her one of the department's most successful investigators. Rex dozed quietly in the back seat, occasionally opening one amber eye to monitor his partner's emotional state. The community center looked different in the early morning light, less welcoming, more institutional. The colorful banners from Saturday's safety fair had been removed, leaving only the stark beige building with its pragmatic architecture and small playground visible through the chain-link fence. Sarah had deliberately arrived early to observe the facility's normal operations before introducing the complications of an official investigation. At 7:30 sharp, she watched David Chun's silver Honda Civic pull into the parking lot. Even from 50 yards away, Sarah could observe his body language as he exited his vehicle. He moved with purpose, but not urgency, checking his phone twice before walking toward the employee entrance. To any casual observer, he appeared to be starting another normal workday. But Sarah noticed the way his eyes swept the parking lot, lingering on her patrol car longer than curiosity would warrant. 15 minutes later, Sarah entered the administrative office carrying a manila folder containing her preliminary incident report and a carefully prepared list of questions. The office smelled like industrial coffee and photocopying toner, with motivational posters about youth development covering walls painted in cheerful but faded yellow. Margaret Williamson, the community center's director for the past 11 years, greeted Sarah with professional courtesy, tinged by obvious anxiety. Margaret was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair pulled into a practical bun and the tired eyes of someone who had spent decades navigating the complex challenges of community social work. She had built the center's reputation through careful relationship building and meticulous attention to both programming quality and safety protocols. "Detective Martinez, thank you for coming in," Margaret said, gesturing toward a small conference room adjacent to her office. "I've been thinking about Saturday's incident all weekend. I want to assure you that we take any concerns about our staff members extremely seriously." Sarah settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair and opened her folder deliberately, establishing the formal tone of the interview. "I appreciate your cooperation, Mrs. Williamson. I need to understand David Chun's role here and his access to the children in your programs." Margaret's face tightened slightly. "David has been with us for 8 years. He started as a part-time evening custodian while finishing his social work degree at Cal State. Over the years, he's proven himself to be exceptionally dedicated to our mission. Parents consistently praise his patience and creativity with their children." "What specific programs does he oversee?" Sarah asked, taking notes despite having Rex's presence, creating a slight distraction. The dog had positioned himself where he could observe both women, his training in reading human stress levels, making him an inadvertent polygraph. Currently, he coordinates our after-school tutoring program for elementary students and assists with our toddler daycare 3 days a week, Margaret explained, pulling out a thick binder filled with organizational charts and program descriptions. "He also helps with special events and field trips when we need additional supervision." Sarah felt her investigative instincts sharpen. When did he begin working with the toddler program? Margaret consulted a calendar on her desk, flipping back several pages. "Let me see, It was approximately 6 weeks ago. We had a staff member go on maternity leave unexpectedly, and David volunteered to fill the gap. He said he wanted to expand his skill set and work with younger children." The timeline aligned perfectly with Emma's behavioral changes, sending a chill down Sarah's spine. Predators often maneuvered themselves into positions providing access to their preferred victims, and the timing was far too coincidental to ignore. "Has David ever been alone with individual children during his work here?" Sarah continued, keeping her voice neutral despite the growing tension in her chest. Well, yes, that's sometimes necessary, Margaret admitted, her discomfort becoming more apparent. During bathroom breaks, when children need individual attention, or during the quiet time period when some toddlers nap. We have protocols in place, of course, but complete supervision of every interaction isn't always practical with our staffing levels. Sarah made careful notes about these protocols, already identifying potential vulnerabilities that a predator could exploit. I'll need to see David's employment file, including his background check results and any performance evaluations. Margaret hesitated, clearly torn between cooperation and protecting her employees' privacy. I'll need to contact our legal counsel about personnel file access. But I can tell you that David passed an extensive background check when he was hired, and again when he moved into a position with greater child contact responsibilities. Has there been any unusual incidents involving David and children? Any complaints from parents, even minor ones? Sarah pressed, watching Margaret's body language carefully. Nothing formal, Margaret said slowly, then paused as if remembering something. Although there have been a few parents who mentioned their children seemed more reluctant to attend programs lately. But we attributed that to normal developmental phases. Toddlers go through periods of separation anxiety. Sarah's pulse quickened. Which parents? Which children? Margaret consulted another file, running her finger down a list of names. Mrs. Thompson mentioned that Jake has been having tantrums about coming to daycare. Mrs. Patterson said Sophia has been having nightmares. And Mrs. Chun, ironically no relation to David, reported that Marcus has been wetting his bed again after months of being fully potty trained. Each name felt like another piece of evidence falling into place. Sarah had investigated enough child abuse cases to recognize the pattern. Multiple children showing trauma symptoms simultaneously, behavioral regression, and reluctance to return to the place where abuse occurred. I'd like to interview these parents, Sarah said, closing her notebook with deliberate finality. And I'll need a complete schedule of David's duties, including when he's alone with children and which specific children he works with regularly. Margaret nodded reluctantly, her professional demeanor beginning to crack as the implications of the investigation became clearer. Detective Martinez, I have to ask, do you really believe Emma's accusation? David has been like family to many of our children. The thought that he could have. Mrs. Williamson, Sarah interrupted gently but firmly. Children Emma's age rarely fabricate detailed sexual allegations. When they do make such statements, our experience shows they're telling the truth in the vast majority of cases. My job is to follow the evidence wherever it leads. As Sarah prepared to leave, she reflected on how predators often thrived in environments built on trust and community connection. The very qualities that made David Chun effective with children, his patience, his ability to connect with families, his volunteer spirit, could also provide perfect camouflage for someone with darker intentions. Walking back to her patrol car, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Emma Rodriguez had been brave enough to speak her truth, and now it was Sarah's job to determine whether that truth would lead to justice or become another child's voice lost in the complex machinery of adult disbelief and institutional protection. The breadcrumbs were becoming a trail, and Sarah Martinez intended to follow it wherever it led, no matter how dark the destination might prove to be. The next 48 hours transformed Detective Sarah Martinez into a careful choreographer of sensitive conversations, each interview requiring the delicate balance of a surgeon's precision and a therapist's intuition. She had learned through years of investigating crimes against children that the truth often hid beneath layers of parental denial, social conditioning, and the heartbreaking tendency of victims to protect their abusers through silence. Tuesday morning found Sarah sitting in the cheerfully decorated living room of the Thompson family home, surrounded by colorful toys and children's artwork that created an almost surreal contrast to the dark conversation she was about to initiate. 4-year-old Jake Thompson played quietly in the corner with building blocks, occasionally glancing toward the adults with a hypervigilant awareness that Sarah had learned to recognize in traumatized children. Patricia Thompson, Jake's mother, was a nurse at Riverside General Hospital who prided herself on being observant about child development and behavior. She sat rigidly on the edge of her sofa, her hands clasped tightly in her lap as she struggled to process the implications of Sarah's carefully worded questions. "I don't understand what you're suggesting, Detective," Patricia said, her voice strained with the effort of maintaining composure. "Jake loves going to the community center. David is wonderful with him. He's been helping Jake with his letters and numbers." But even as Patricia defended David Chun, Sarah noticed the contradictions. In her account, Jake had indeed been enthusiastic about the community center for months, but his behavior had shifted dramatically in recent weeks. The confident, outgoing child had become clingy and anxious, requiring his mother to stay for increasingly longer periods during drop-off. "You mentioned that Jake has been having accidents again," Sarah said gently, consulting her notes. "Can you tell me when that started?" Patricia's face flushed with embarrassment. "About a month ago. The pediatrician said it's normal for children to regress sometimes, especially during stressful periods. Jake started preschool this year, so we assumed it was adjustment anxiety." Sarah watched Jake carefully as his mother spoke. The little boy's body language told a different story than his mother's words. He had stopped playing with his blocks and was now sitting motionless, his small hands pressed against his ears, as if trying to block out the conversation. When Sarah mentioned David's name earlier, Jake had visibly flinched and moved closer to the wall. "Has Jake said anything unusual about his time at the community center? About David or any of the other staff members?" Sarah pressed, keeping her voice neutral and non-leading. "Well, double quotes." Patricia hesitated, glancing toward her son. "He's been saying some strange things during bath time. He keeps asking if it's okay to say no when grown-ups ask him to do things. And he's become very resistant to taking naps there. He used to love quiet time." The mention of quiet time caused Jake to look up sharply, his eyes wide with unmistakable fear. Sarah felt her heart break a little as she recognized the terror of a child who had learned that certain words carried dangerous implications. Her next interview, conducted Wednesday afternoon, painted an even more disturbing picture. 3-year-old Sophia Martinez, no relation to Sarah, exhibited classic symptoms of trauma regression that her mother Jessica had been attributing to typical developmental challenges. "Sophia used to be such a confident little girl," Jessica explained absently, stroking her daughter's hair as the child clung to her lap. "But lately, she's been having terrible nightmares. She wakes up screaming about the bad touching game and refuses to go back to sleep." Sarah's trained ear caught the significance immediately. The bad touching game was specific language that suggested inappropriate sexual contact, not the vague fears typically associated with normal childhood nightmares. "Has Sophia ever mentioned who taught her this game?" Sarah asked carefully, watching both mother and daughter for reactions. Sophia buried her face deeper into her mother's shoulder, but Sarah caught her whispered response. "Mr. David says it's our special secret. Good girls don't tell secrets." The phrase sent ice through Sarah's veins. Predators consistently used secrecy as a tool of control, convincing children that revealing abuse would result in punishment or harm to themselves or their families. The fact that multiple children were exhibiting similar behavioral changes and using comparable language suggested a systematic pattern of abuse. Her final interview of the week proved to be the most heartbreaking. Marcus Chun, David's son by a coincidental shared surname, was a bright 8-year-old who had been attending the community center's after-school program for 2 years. His mother, Linda Chun, was a single parent working 2 jobs who relied heavily on the center's extended care services. Marcus has always been my little helper, Linda explained, her voice thick with confusion and emerging dread. But lately, he's been so angry. He started hitting other children at school, and his teacher says he's been using inappropriate language that she can't understand where he learned. Sarah had saved this interview for last because Marcus was old enough to potentially provide more detailed information, but also old enough to understand the serious implications of what he might reveal. She approached the conversation with exceptional care, using techniques she had learned from child forensic specialists. "Marcus," Sarah said gently, sitting at the child's eye level, "your mom told me you've been feeling upset lately. Sometimes, when kids feel upset, it's because someone has done something that made them uncomfortable. Has anyone ever asked you to keep secrets that made you feel bad?" Marcus's response was immediate and devastating. His small face crumpled as tears began streaming down his cheeks. "Mr. David says if I tell, my mom will get in trouble and won't be able to work anymore. He says I'm the man of the house and have to protect her." The sophisticated manipulation revealed the calculated nature of David Chun's abuse. He had identified each child's specific vulnerabilities: Jake's desire to please adults, Sophia's natural trust, Marcus's protective instincts toward his struggling mother, and exploited them with predatory precision. As Sarah compiled her notes that evening, the pattern became undeniably clear. 4 children, all attending programs supervised by David Chun, all exhibiting behavioral changes that began within weeks of his increased access to the toddler program. Each child showed classic trauma symptoms: regression in developmental milestones, sleep disturbances, inappropriate sexual knowledge, fear responses to specific triggers, and reluctance to attend the previously enjoyed programs. The most chilling discovery was the systematic nature of the abuse. David had rotated between children, varying his schedule to avoid suspicion, and had tailored his manipulation techniques to each victim's psychological profile. He had hidden in plain sight, protected by his reputation and the community's trust, while systematically traumatizing the children placed in his care. Sarah realized she was looking at evidence of ongoing, calculated child sexual abuse, perpetrated by someone who had spent years perfecting his methods and building his cover. Emma Rodriguez's brave words at the community fair had potentially exposed a predator who might have continued his crimes indefinitely without detection. The children's silent screams had finally found a voice through Emma's innocent honesty, and Sarah Martinez was determined to ensure that their pain would not be ignored or dismissed by a system that too often protected institutions over victims. Friday afternoon, October 15th, 2:17 p.m. Detective Sarah Martinez would remember those exact coordinates in time for the rest of her career as the moment when months of careful investigation crystallized into the confrontation that would either vindicate 4 traumatized children or destroy an innocent man's life. The sterile interview room at Riverside Police Department felt smaller than usual, its beige walls and fluorescent lighting creating an atmosphere of institutional gravity that seemed to press down on everyone present. David Chun sat across the metal table from Sarah, his hands folded with deliberate precision on the surface between them. He had arrived 15 minutes early for what he believed was a routine follow-up interview about the misunderstanding at the community fair. His appearance was carefully curated: pressed khakis, a navy polo shirt with the community center logo, and wire-rimmed glasses that gave him an academic, trustworthy appearance. Everything about his presentation screamed responsible youth worker wrongly accused. Sarah had spent the previous night reviewing every detail of her investigation, organizing evidence with the methodical precision that had made her one of the department's most successful interrogators. The case file spread before her contained behavioral assessments from 4 families, timeline correlations, employment records, and most damning of all, a pattern of systematic abuse that had been hiding in plain sight for weeks. "Thank you for coming in voluntarily, David," Sarah began, her voice carrying professional courtesy that masked the steel underneath. "I want to give you an opportunity to address some concerns that have come to light during our investigation." David's smile remained steady, but Sarah noticed the micro-tension around his eyes. "Of course, Detective Martinez. I'm as concerned as anyone about these allegations. Children's safety is my top priority, which is why I've dedicated my career to youth development." The opening gambit was textbook, immediate positioning as a champion of child welfare, designed to make any accusations seem absurd. Sarah had heard variations of this response from dozens of suspects over the years, and she recognized the calculated nature of David's self-presentation. "Let's start with your relationship with Emma Rodriguez," Sarah said, opening the case file with deliberate theatricality. "You mentioned at the community fair that you had worked with her during quiet time. Can you describe those interactions?" David's posture remained controlled, but Sarah caught the slight tightening of his jaw. "Emma is a delightful child, but she's been having some behavioral challenges lately. During rest periods, I've tried to help her settle down by reading stories or playing quiet games. Sometimes children that age need individual attention to feel secure." "Individual attention," Sarah repeated, making a note. "Are you alone with Emma during these sessions?" "Occasionally, yes. Our staffing levels require flexibility, and I've never had any issues with one-on-one interactions. My supervisor can verify my excellent track record with children." Sarah nodded non-committally, then shifted tactics. "I've interviewed the families of Jake Thompson, Sophia Martinez, and Marcus Chun as well. All 4 children have exhibited similar behavioral changes in recent weeks: bedwetting, nightmares, aggression, withdrawal. Can you think of any reason why multiple children in your program would suddenly develop these symptoms?" For the first time, David's composure showed hairline cracks. His fingers drummed once against the table before he caught himself and returned them to their folded position. "Children go through developmental phases. It's not uncommon for multiple children to experience behavioral changes simultaneously, especially during transitions, like starting new programs or adjusting to schedule changes." "Interesting theory," Sarah said, pulling out a calendar marked with detailed annotations. "According to my timeline, all 4 children's behavioral changes began within a 2-week period following your reassignment to the toddler program. That's quite a coincidence." David's breathing became slightly more shallow, though he maintained his pleasant expression. "Correlation doesn't imply causation, Detective. I'm sure you learned that in your training. There could be numerous environmental factors affecting these children." Sarah was impressed by his persistence, but she could see the stress accumulating beneath his careful facade. She decided to apply more pressure. "Let's talk about specific allegations," she continued, pulling out her interview notes. "Sophia Martinez mentioned the bad touching game. Marcus Chun described being asked to keep secrets that made him uncomfortable. Jake Thompson has become terrified of quiet time. These are very specific concerns, David." The mention of specific details caused David's face to pale slightly, but he rallied with practiced deflection. Children that age often confuse reality with imagination. They hear things on television, overhear adult conversations, and create elaborate fantasy scenarios. It's tragic that innocent interactions are being misinterpreted this way. Sarah leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a more intense quality. 4 different children, David. 4 families who trusted you with their most precious possessions. Children who went from loving the community center to being terrified of attending. Children who wake up screaming about things no child should know about. "I understand your concern," David replied, but his voice was beginning to show strain. But accusations without evidence are just that, accusations. I've devoted my life to helping children, and these allegations are devastating to everything I've worked to build. Sarah opened another folder, this one containing photographs of the community center's layout, scheduling documents, and detailed reports of when David had been alone with each child. Actually, David, I have considerable evidence. I have documented patterns of access, behavioral timelines, and most importantly, I have the words of 4 brave children who found the courage to speak their truth. David's hands began to tremble, almost imperceptibly. Children can be influenced by leading questions, Detective. I'm sure you understand how suggestible they are at that age. Emma Rodriguez is 2 years old, Sarah said quietly, her words carrying the weight of absolute certainty. She pointed directly at you and said, "Bad man touch Emma's private parts during nap time." That's not suggestible testimony, David. That's a child reporting what happened to her. The room fell silent, except for the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant sounds of the police station beyond the closed door. Sarah watched as David's carefully constructed mask began to dissolve, his breathing becoming more rapid and his composure finally starting to crack under the accumulated weight of evidence and confrontation. "You don't understand," David whispered, his voice breaking for the first time. "I never meant for any of this to happen. They're so innocent, so trusting. I tried to stop, but I couldn't control myself." The confession came pouring out like water through a broken dam. Months of systematic abuse, calculated manipulation, and the exploitation of children who had been placed in his care by families who trusted him completely. Sarah listened with professional detachment, while her heart broke for the victims whose courage had finally brought their abuser to justice. David Chun's house of cards had finally collapsed, brought down by the innocent words of a 2-year-old who refused to keep his terrible secrets. The news of David Chun's arrest spread through Riverside Heights like wildfire on a drought-stricken hillside, consuming everything in its path with devastating speed and leaving nothing but scorched earth and shattered trust in its wake. Detective Sarah Martinez had seen communities reel from shocking revelations before, but never had she witnessed such complete devastation of collective faith as she observed in the days following David's confession. Saturday morning, less than 24 hours after David Chun had been processed into the county jail system, emergency community meetings were being organized in living rooms, coffee shops, and church basements throughout the neighborhood. The Riverside Community Center itself had been temporarily closed, pending a comprehensive investigation, its cheerful playground equipment standing empty and somehow ominous under the autumn sky. Maria Rodriguez sat in her small kitchen, clutching a cup of coffee that had long since grown cold, while Emma played with building blocks on the floor nearby. The weight of guilt pressed down on Maria's shoulders like a physical burden that threatened to crush her spirit entirely. She kept replaying that terrible moment at the community fair when Emma had pointed at David Chun, remembering her own desperate attempts to silence her granddaughter's accusations. "I should have believed her immediately," Maria whispered to her neighbor Rosa Delgado, who had come over to provide emotional support. "My own granddaughter was crying for help, and I was more worried about being embarrassed in front of the community than protecting her." Rosa reached across the table and squeezed Maria's trembling hand. "You couldn't have known, Maria. None of us could have imagined that David was capable of such things. He seemed like such a good man, so dedicated to the children. But Maria's self-recrimination ran deeper than rational consolation could reach. Every grandmother's instinct screamed that she should have recognized the signs, should have trusted Emma's terror over social convention, should have been the fierce protector her granddaughter needed instead of the embarrassed caretaker worried about community perception. 3 blocks away, Patricia Thompson paced her living room like a caged animal, her phone pressed against her ear as she spoke with the pediatric trauma counselor recommended by Detective Martinez. Jake sat on the couch nearby, coloring with unusual intensity, while obviously listening to every word of his mother's conversation. "I keep thinking about all the times I encouraged Jake to go to David for help," Patricia said, her voice breaking with each word. "When Jake started having accidents, when he became withdrawn, when he stopped wanting to go to the center, I kept telling him that David was there to help him, that he should trust Mr. David. I was literally sending my baby back to his abuser. Over and over again." The pediatric counselor's voice was gentle, but firm through the phone. "Mrs. Thompson, predators are skilled at exploiting exactly this kind of trust. They position themselves as helpers and protectors specifically, so that parents will override their children's distress signals. This is not your fault." But Patricia's maternal instincts rejected any absolution. She had failed in the most fundamental way a mother could fail. She had not protected her child from harm. The knowledge that Jake had been suffering while she remained oblivious felt like a knife twisting in her chest with every breath. Meanwhile, the wider community was fracturing along lines of belief and denial. That seemed to shift with each new piece of information that emerged. At Martinez grocery store, longtime neighbors found themselves on opposite sides of bitter arguments about whether the allegations could possibly be true. "David Chun has been working with our children for 8 years, insisted Robert Walsh, whose own teenage daughter had participated in David's programs years earlier. 8 years of exemplary service. How are we supposed to believe that someone could hide such monstrous behavior for so long?" But Carmen Martinez, the store owner, had a different perspective shaped by her own difficult childhood. "Monsters don't look like monsters, Roberto. They look like teachers and coaches and youth workers. They look like people we trust, because that's how they get close to our children." The argument escalated as other customers joined the debate, voices rising in anger and frustration as the community grappled with the impossible task of reconciling the David Chun they thought they knew with the predator who had confessed to systematically abusing their children. At the county courthouse, an emergency session had been called to address the immediate concerns of affected families. The conference room was packed with parents, grandparents, and community leaders struggling to process the magnitude of what had been revealed. Margaret Williamson, the community center director, sat at the front table looking as though she had aged 10 years in 3 days. "We are implementing immediate policy changes," Margaret announced, her voice barely steady. "No staff member will ever again be alone with children. All interaction areas will have direct visual supervision. We are installing comprehensive security camera systems and requiring dual adult approval for any private conversations with children." But for many parents in the room, policy changes felt like closing the barn door after the horses had already escaped. Linda Chun, Marcus's mother, stood up with trembling legs to address the assembly. "My son trusted David Chun," she said, her voice gaining strength as she spoke. "I trusted David Chun. We all trusted him because he was exactly what we wanted to see: patient, kind, dedicated to helping our children. But that trust became a weapon he used to hurt our babies." The room fell silent as Linda continued, tears streaming down her face. "Marcus keeps asking me if he did something wrong, if he's in trouble for keeping David's secrets. My 8-year-old son has been carrying this burden alone because a predator convinced him that protecting me was more important than protecting himself." As Linda spoke, other parents began sharing their own devastating realizations. Children who had stopped sleeping through the night. Behavioral changes that had been dismissed as developmental phases. Warning signs that had been rationalized away because David Chun had been so trusted, so beloved, so impossible to suspect. Detective Sarah Martinez, observing from the back of the room, felt the full weight of why cases like this were so devastating to communities. It wasn't just about individual victims and their families. It was about the complete destruction of collective trust, the shattering of faith in institutions and authority figures, and the terrible knowledge that evil could hide behind the most benevolent facades. But as she watched the community struggle with their pain and anger, Sarah also saw something else emerging from the devastation: a fierce determination to protect their children better in the future, to listen more carefully to small voices, trying to speak difficult truths, and to create systems that would make it impossible for another predator to exploit their trust. Emma Rodriguez had spoken truth to power in the form of an innocent comment to a police dog, and while the revelation had shattered their community's peace, it had also potentially saved countless other children from suffering the same fate as had Jake, Sophia, Marcus, and Emma herself. The trust they had lost could never be fully restored, but from its ashes, a more vigilant and protective community was beginning to emerge. 2 years and 3 months after Emma Rodriguez pointed at David Chun and spoke her truth to a police dog, the morning sun cast long shadows across the renovated Riverside Community Center as families began arriving for the 3rd annual Children's Voice Day, a celebration born from tragedy but dedicated to hope, healing, and the unwavering commitment to protect every child's right to safety and dignity. The community center looked dramatically different from the facility where David Chun had once preyed upon vulnerable children. Glass walls now provided clear sight lines into every room. Security cameras monitored all interactions, and a strict 2-adult policy ensured that no child would ever again be alone with a single staff member. But more importantly, the entire culture of the organization had been transformed from one of blind trust to one of vigilant protection balanced with genuine care. Emma Rodriguez, now 4.5 years old, skipped across the playground with the carefree energy of a child whose trauma had been carefully and lovingly addressed through years of specialized therapy. Her dark curls bounced in the sunshine as she called out to her friend Marcus Chun, who was building an elaborate castle in the sandbox with focused determination that spoke to his own remarkable journey toward healing. Maria Rodriguez watched her granddaughter play from a bench near the playground's entrance, her heart simultaneously full of pride and forever marked by the knowledge of how close they had come to losing Emma's innocence entirely. The guilt that had once threatened to consume Maria had been gradually transformed through therapy and community support into fierce advocacy for child protection, an unwavering belief in children's voices. "Look, Abuela," Emma called out, pointing toward the police demonstration area where Detective Sarah Martinez was setting up for her presentation with Rex, now a 7-year-old veteran whose gentle wisdom had helped dozens of traumatized children begin their healing journeys. "It's Rex. He's the doggy who helped us tell the truth." Sarah Martinez had made Children's Voice Day a priority in her annual schedule, not just because of her role in uncovering David Chun's crimes, but because she had witnessed firsthand how one child's courage could create ripple effects that protected countless others. She wore her dress uniform for the occasion, her chest displaying commendations she had received for her exemplary work in child protection, including a special recognition from the State Attorney General's office for her investigation techniques that prioritized child welfare over institutional convenience. "Good morning, everyone," Sarah addressed the gathered crowd, her voice carrying the authority of experience, tempered by genuine warmth. "Today, we celebrate something very important: the power of children's voices and the adults who choose to listen to them." In the audience, Patricia Thompson held 4-year-old Jake's hand as he watched the demonstration with interest rather than fear. Jake had been one of the greatest success stories of the comprehensive therapy program established in the wake of the Chun case. His aggressive outbursts had gradually given way to age-appropriate assertiveness, and his nightmares had been replaced by dreams of becoming a police officer who protects kids like Rex protects everyone. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. Jake still attended weekly therapy sessions, and his mother had learned to recognize the subtle signs that indicated when her son was struggling with difficult memories. But the terrified, angry child, who had emerged from David Chun's abuse, had grown into a confident little boy who understood the difference between appropriate and inappropriate adult behavior and felt empowered to speak up when something didn't feel right. Near the back of the crowd, Linda Chun stood with 8-year-old Marcus, whose own healing journey had been complicated by the shared surname with his abuser and the additional burden of feeling somehow responsible for David Chun's crimes against other children. Through extensive counseling, Marcus had learned that names didn't determine character and that his own victimization was never his fault, regardless of any manipulative words David had used to convince him otherwise. Marcus had become an unexpected leader among the child survivors, often volunteering to speak with newer therapy participants about the importance of telling trusted adults when something felt wrong. His maturity and compassion had emerged as powerful tools for helping other children understand that healing was possible and that speaking the truth, no matter how difficult, was always the right choice. The fourth survivor, Sofia Martinez, now 5 years old, had perhaps made the most traumatic recovery. Her nightmares about the bad touching game had gradually been replaced by dreams of becoming a teacher who would keep all the kids safe and happy. She attended a different preschool now, one with the enhanced safety protocols that had become standard throughout the district following the Chun case, and her natural exuberance had returned stronger than ever. As Detective Martinez concluded her presentation with Rex, demonstrating his search capabilities, she made the same closing remarks that had become her signature at every Children's Voice Day celebration. Remember, boys and girls, your voices matter. When something doesn't feel right, when someone asks you to keep secrets that make you uncomfortable, when anyone touches you in ways that feel wrong, you tell a trusted adult, and you keep telling until someone listens and helps you. A crowd erupted in applause, but Sarah's attention was focused on the children in the audience, particularly Emma Rodriguez, who was clapping enthusiastically while sitting on her grandmother's lap. That little girl's innocent words to a police dog had set in motion a chain of events that had not only brought justice for 4 young victims, but had fundamentally changed how their community approached child protection. David Chun was now 3 years into his 15-year sentence at Pelican Bay State Prison, listed on the sex offender registry for life, and facing the daily reality of being a convicted child molester in an environment where such crimes were met with harsh justice from fellow inmates. His appeals had been denied, his reputation destroyed, and his access to children permanently eliminated. But more importantly than his punishment was the transformation his crimes had sparked in Riverside Heights. A community had emerged from their collective trauma with enhanced awareness, stronger protective systems, and an unwavering commitment to believing children when they found the courage to speak about abuse. Emma Rodriguez had grown from a frightened 2-year-old with a terrible secret into a confident little girl who understood that telling the truth, even when it was scary, was always the right thing to do. Her innocent words to a police dog had, indeed, unleashed a shocking truth. But from that darkness had emerged a community more vigilant, more protective, and infinitely stronger. Sometimes the smallest voices carry the most powerful messages, and sometimes those messages change everything for the better. Emma's courage had proven that truth, no matter how difficult to hear, would always triumph over the carefully constructed lies of those who would harm the innocent. The healing would continue, the vigilance would remain, and the children's voices would never again be silenced or ignored in Riverside Heights.